What if your life completely fell apart, and instead of giving up, you decided to start over in one of the hardest jobs imaginable? That's the story behind The Rookie. And before we get into everything, make sure to like and subscribe, because this isn't just a police drama, it's a story about second chances, pressure, danger, loyalty, and how ordinary people are forced to grow under extraordinary circumstances. The story begins with John Nolan, a man in his 40s whose life has reached a breaking point. After his marriage falls apart and he realizes he's been stuck living the same routine for years, Nolan witnesses a bank robbery in his hometown and unexpectedly helps police during the situation. That experience changes something inside him. For the first time in years, he feels purpose again. Instead of accepting that his life is already decided because of his age, Nolan makes a shocking choice. He moves to Los Angeles to become a police officer, making him the oldest rookie in the LAPD. Right from the beginning, Nolan faces constant doubt. Most people around him believe he's too old, too inexperienced, and too idealistic to survive the job. The LAPD sees him almost like a liability, someone who doesn't fit the image of a rookie officer. But Nolan's age actually becomes one of his biggest strengths because, unlike the younger rookies around him, he has real-life experience, patience, and emotional maturity. Still, that doesn't make things easier. Training officers push the rookies constantly, and the job immediately throws them into dangerous, chaotic, and emotionally intense situations where mistakes can cost lives. At the same time, the series introduces the other rookies going through training alongside Nolan. Lucy Chen is intelligent, determined, and emotionally strong, but she constantly struggles to prove herself in a male-dominated environment. Jackson West comes from a respected police family and feels enormous pressure to live up to his father's reputation, while also dealing with fear that he may not actually be suited for the job. Together, the three rookies form a close bond because they're all trying to survive a system designed to test them every day. One of the strongest parts of the early story is the relationship between the rookies and their training officers. Nolan is paired with Talia Bishop, a tough and highly respected officer who initially views Nolan as a risk more than a partner. Bishop constantly pushes him to understand that policing in Los Angeles is far more dangerous and morally complicated than he expects. Lucy trains under Tim Bradford, a strict and emotionally guarded officer known for being extremely hard on rookies. At first, Bradford seems cold and almost impossible to impress, but over time it becomes clear that beneath his harsh exterior is someone deeply shaped by trauma and responsibility. Jackson trains under Angela Lopez, who balances toughness with mentorship while trying to establish her own career within the department. As the rookies begin adjusting to life on patrol, the series explores how unpredictable the job really is. Some days involve routine calls and small crimes. Other days suddenly become life or death situations involving shootouts, gang violence, kidnappings, and dangerous criminals. What makes the story compelling is that it constantly reminds viewers how quickly normal situations can spiral into chaos. Nolan enters the job believing he can always do the right thing, but he slowly learns that policing often involves morally difficult decisions where there isn't always a perfect outcome. At the same time, the personal lives of the characters become just as important as the action. Nolan struggles to balance his new career with relationships and his role as a father, especially as the dangerous nature of his job affects the people around him. Lucy begins developing emotionally through her experiences on the force, while Jackson battles insecurity and fear of failure. The series spends a lot of time showing how becoming a police officer changes people psychologically, forcing them to confront fear, trauma, and responsibility much faster than ordinary life would. One of the biggest emotional turning points in the early seasons involves Tim Bradford and Lucy Chen. Initially, their relationship is strictly professional, with Bradford pushing Lucy harder than almost anyone else. But over time, mutual respect slowly develops between them. Bradford begins recognizing Lucy's intelligence, resilience, and ability to stay calm under pressure, while Lucy slowly sees that Bradford's harshness often comes from wanting his rookies to survive. Their growing bond becomes one of the emotional foundations of the entire series because it evolves naturally over time instead of happening instantly. As Nolan improves as an officer, the people around him begin taking him more seriously. He proves repeatedly that despite his age and lack of experience, he has instincts and compassion that make him valuable in situations where others might panic. But the job continues testing him constantly. Criminals become more dangerous, the situations more intense, and the emotional weight of policing grows heavier as the rookies begin witnessing death, trauma, and violence more regularly. The series also begins expanding beyond simple patrol stories into larger criminal conspiracies and recurring threats. Detectives, undercover operations, serial criminals, and organized crime networks begin playing larger roles, making the world of the show feel bigger and more dangerous. Angela Lopez rises within the department while balancing personal relationships. Tim Bradford confronts emotional trauma tied to his past and former marriage. Lucy continues evolving into one of the most capable officers among the rookies. Nolan slowly transforms from someone trying to prove he belongs into someone genuinely becoming a leader. But one of the darkest moments of the early story comes when Lucy is kidnapped and buried alive by a serial killer connected to one of her cases. This storyline becomes one of the most emotional and intense arcs in the series because it pushes every character to their their limits. Bradford especially becomes desperate to save her, revealing how much he genuinely cares beneath his normally controlled personality. Lucy survives, but the trauma changes her permanently, making her stronger emotionally while also showing the psychological toll the job can have. As the early seasons continue, the rookies eventually complete training and officially become full police officers, but the transition doesn't make life easier. If anything, the stakes become even higher because they now carry full responsibility for their decisions without the protection of being trainees. Nolan begins considering what kind of officer he truly wants to become, while Lucy becomes increasingly interested in undercover work because of her ability to adapt and read people. Jackson continues trying to balance confidence with self-doubt, and the group's friendships grow deeper through everything they survive together. At the same time, the city itself almost becomes a character within the story. Los Angeles is portrayed as unpredictable, dangerous, and constantly moving, creating an environment where officers never know what the next call will bring. One moment characters are joking together in their patrol cars, and the next they're caught in shootouts or hostage situations. That constant unpredictability becomes part of what defines the series. By the end of the first major stage of the story, Nolan has already changed enormously from the man introduced at the beginning. What started as a desperate attempt to rebuild his life has turned into something much bigger. He has found purpose again, built relationships that feel like family, and proven to himself that starting over is possible no matter your age. But the further he moves into policing, the more complicated everything becomes. Corruption, trauma, dangerous criminals, and emotional loss begin testing everyone around him in ways they never expected. And as the officers become more experienced, the dangers surrounding them only continue growing, because surviving the academy was just the beginning. The real challenge is surviving everything that comes after it. As the story moves into its later seasons, everything begins feeling larger, more dangerous, and far more personal for the officers at Mid-Wilshire. By this point, John Nolan is no longer seen as the old rookie everyone doubted in the beginning. He has proven himself repeatedly through dangerous situations, difficult decisions, and genuine compassion for the people he serves. But with experience comes new pressure. Nolan begins realizing that being a good officer is not just about surviving calls or arresting criminals anymore. It's about leadership, responsibility, and deciding what kind of impact he wants to leave on the people around him. One of the biggest shifts in the story comes as Nolan begins moving toward becoming a training officer himself. This is important because it completely changes his role in the series. Early on, Nolan was always the one learning from others, making mistakes and trying to catch up. Now he's the person expected to guide younger officers through the same pressure and danger he once faced himself. The transition forces him to reflect on how much he has changed since joining the LAPD. He still keeps the empathy and optimism that made him different from many officers around him, but the job has hardened him in ways he never expected. At the same time, Lucy Chen's journey becomes one of the strongest arcs in the entire series. After surviving the trauma of being kidnapped and buried alive, Lucy becomes even more determined to push herself further within law enforcement. She develops a growing interest in undercover work because of her intelligence, adaptability, and ability to read people emotionally. Undercover operations become some of the most intense parts of the story because Lucy often has to completely change her identity and place herself in extremely dangerous situations surrounded by violent criminals. These storylines also show the emotional toll of living double lives, as Lucy constantly risks losing herself while trying to maintain trust with the people around her. Her relationship with Tim Bradford also continues evolving in a way that becomes central to the later seasons. What began as a harsh training relationship slowly transforms into one built on trust, loyalty, and emotional understanding. Tim changes enormously throughout the story. Early on, he hid most of his emotions behind discipline and control, but Lucy gradually becomes one of the few people capable of truly understanding him. Their chemistry grows naturally over time because it's built through years of shared danger, emotional support, and mutual respect. By the later seasons, their relationship becomes one of the emotional highlights of the series because viewers have seen every stage of its development from the very beginning. Meanwhile, Angela Lopez rises higher within the department while balancing marriage, motherhood, and the pressure of police work. Her relationship with Wesley also becomes increasingly important because it constantly places law enforcement and the legal system into conflict. Wesley often sees the justice system from a completely different perspective, creating situations where Angela is forced to question difficult ethical issues tied to policing, loyalty, and power. Their relationship adds another layer to the story because it shows how complicated balancing personal life and police work can become. The series also continues exploring increasingly large criminal conspiracies and long-term threats. Drug cartels, serial killers, corrupt officers, organized crime networks, and dangerous fugitives all begin playing larger roles in the story. What started as a grounded police drama slowly expands into something much bigger, with officers finding themselves involved in operations that stretch far beyond ordinary patrol duties. Some cases become deeply personal, especially when criminals begin targeting officers and their families directly. The danger no longer stays on the streets, it follows them home. One of the most emotional changes in the later story is the loss and departure of important characters. Jackson West's death becomes one of the most shocking moments in the series series because he had been part of the story from the beginning. His death reminds everyone how dangerous the job truly is and permanently changes the emotional dynamic of the team. The officers are forced to confront the reality that no amount of training or experience guarantees survival. That loss weighs heavily on Nolan, Lucy, and the others because it represents the cost of the life they've chosen. At the same time, the show introduces new rookies and younger officers, allowing Nolan and the others to take on mentorship roles themselves. This creates an interesting full-circle effect where the characters who once struggled through training now see reflections of their younger selves in the new generation. Nolan especially becomes determined to mentor officers differently than many training officers mentored him. He wants rookies to survive not only physically, but emotionally as well. As the seasons continue, the personal lives of the characters become even more interconnected. Relationships grow more serious, families expand, and several characters begin thinking about what kind of future they actually want beyond the badge. Nolan's relationship with Bailey becomes especially important because for the first time in years, he truly begins imagining stability and long-term happiness outside of work. But the unpredictable nature of policing constantly threatens that balance. Emergencies, dangerous assignments, and violent criminals continue interrupting even the most personal moments in their lives. Another major focus of the later seasons is how policing affects officers mentally over time. The series spends more time showing burnout, trauma, and emotional exhaustion, especially as characters deal with repeated violence and life-threatening situations. Some officers struggle with guilt over people they couldn't save. Others begin questioning whether they can continue doing the job forever. These emotional storylines help keep the show grounded even as the action becomes bigger and more intense. By the time the story reaches its newest seasons, Nolan has become exactly what nobody expected him to be when he first walked into the LAPD Academy. Not a joke, not a failure, but a respected officer and mentor capable of leading others through chaos. Lucy has transformed into one of the strongest and most capable officers in the department. Tim has learned to open himself emotionally in ways he once never could. Angela continues balancing leadership with family life, and the entire team has evolved from nervous rookies into experienced officers shaped by years of danger, trauma, and loyalty. But despite everything they've survived, the job never becomes easier. Every shift still carries uncertainty. Every call still has the potential to become deadly, and every officer understands that one wrong decision can change lives forever. That's what makes The Rookie more than just another police show. Underneath the action, shootouts, and investigations, it's really about people trying to hold on to their humanity while working inside one of the most stressful and dangerous environments imaginable. It's about second chances, growth, and learning. That experience doesn't make fear disappear. It simply teaches you how to keep moving despite it. And at the center of all of it is John Nolan, the man who started over when most people thought his life was already figured out. Because in the end, The Rookie isn't just about becoming a police officer, it's about proving that it's never too late to become someone completely different from who you used to be.